Today I'm looking at another budget-fi earphone, this time the KZ ZSN Pro, which from AliExpress costs as little as £10 or about $14. But how on earth are they this cheap? Well, let's get into it. Hey guys, this is Noel and this is Wheezy Reviews, and each week I take a look at something audio related and let you know what I think. So if you're into that kind of thing, then make sure you subscribe. Now the KZ ZSN Pro are a hybrid design IEM featuring a single dynamic driver and a single balanced armature. KZ calls the dynamic driver a double magnetic dynamic, although don't be confused by the name, they do appear to be a single diaphragm driver. And although KZ claims these offer sound equivalent to that from a 13 or 14mm driver, they are actually 10mm. The physical construction of these earpieces is a mix of a resin body and a zinc alloy outer cover, with an aluminium vocal cavity. Now this is a rather premium feeling IEM, despite its tiny price tag, and the weight to these is 7 grams per earpiece without tips. They also come in 3 different colorways, the smoked grey that I have here, as well as cyan and pink. The cable connection method is a 2-pin, 0.75mm connection. Now this is what KZ calls their C-pin connector. The stock cable is about as good as you might expect for such a cheap IEM. That is to say that it's not that special. It's not the most flexible, and also the ear hooks themselves, they're pretty stiff. I have seen worse stock cables, and I think the Blon cable is marginally worse than these, but I think that's a pretty low bar. Also, these are missing a chin bead, a cinch. I do prefer to see that with IEM cables for comfort reasons. However, a silicone O-ring is an acceptable analog for a bead. The version I have here also has an inline microphone and play and pause button and whatnot. You can also choose to buy them with the standard cable without the microphone. They come supplied with 4 different pairs of silicone tips. So you have one ordinary pair of silicone tips in a medium size, as well as small, medium and large size silicone tips with a starline grooved pattern at the end. Now I did purchase these from the Woo Easy store on AliExpress, and they also included 8 different pairs of foam tips as well, which was pretty good. And I did actually most of my listening with the foam tips for personal comfort and fit reasons. Comfort for me was much better than I expected. The shape fits in my ears quite well, and I had no issues with the ear hooks on the cables despite them being quite stiff. Now I also purchased an upgraded cable to go with these. This is the KZ earphone silver plated upgrade wire. It's a little bit more flexible than the stock cable, although the ear hooks themselves are pretty much just as stiff as the stock ones. Honestly, the difference between the stock cable and the upgrade one is small, so whether it was worth it or not, I'm not so sure. The box for the upgrade cable does make the claims obvious improve the mid's treble frequency audio performance of headphones. Well, I'm not so sure about that. I didn't particularly notice any difference between the stock cable and the aftermarket cable. And frankly, the feel and the look and the comfort of this cable is far more important than what little perceived difference there may be from this cable. This one certainly is an upgrade on the original, but that is a low bar to pass. KZ do claim that the ZSN Pro do provide up to 26 decibels of isolation, and I'm not really sure how that compares to other earphones, but to my ears, I think these are pretty much average. Not the most isolating I've ever heard, but they also don't sound particularly open. Also, these are super easy to drive at 24 ohms impedance and an incredible 112 dB sensitivity. Now, I was actually really worried I was going to destroy them with my O2 amp. I could barely turn the amp up before they were getting way too loud. In fact, it actually highlighted some channel imbalance issues at extremely low volumes on the O2. That is quite normal in many headphone amps to see some channel imbalance on the very start of the volume pop, but I mean, this is at least a good highlighter for just how sensitive the KZ ZSN are. Let's move on to the sound section, and a quick disclaimer that budget-fi earphones are often known for unit variance, and that might be the case with the ZSN Pro, although I didn't find that much chatter about that online. But this is my experience with this one specific pair of ZSN Pro. And I should also state that all listening was done with foam tips because, as usual, I really struggled to get a good fit with the stock silicone ones. And I just don't get on with silicone tips at all. With that all said, imaging ain't so bad with these, and soundstage, though, is somewhat intimate. In terms of the overall sound signature, it's quite warm and quite bright, so really somewhat of a V-shaped sound. Bass has a decent extension. I could hear down to around 27 to 30 Hertz before I noticed it roll off. It's not overly boosted in the sub and low bass, but there is a bit more energy in the mid and upper bass region. This does make them much warmer on the whole than the T4, and they do perhaps suffer from some bleed into the low mids. Now, I don't mind a warm low end when it's done right, but my main issue with the bass region is really just a lack of detail. This is not a particularly articulate or quick bass, although I did find the ZSN Pro to be quite enjoyable for EDM. They don't completely lack slam capability, but I fear that a lot of the low-end detail is somewhat overpowered by the upper frequency brightness, which we'll go into in just a second. In fact, mids are really not my cup of tea on these. Apart from the warm low end, which I don't mind too much, the huge rise from a 1 kHz up to what sounds like a massive peak at 5 kHz is more than a little bit shouty for my tastes. Upper mid and low treble glare or shout doesn't seem to be uncommon for a lot of IEMs, and I believe that a rise at 5 kHz is required for some kind of pinner gain type of compensation. You also hear something very similar on the T4. However, the ZSN Pro goes just a little bit too far here. The result is that many vocals and instruments and snares in particular sound overly bright, shouty or sibilant and harsh. A good example is the alto sax on Moaning by Charles Mingus, which was so far forwards that it was way out of balance with the rest of the track. Coupled with a rather back of the mix and indistinct bass, I really don't think I've heard a worse reproduction of this track. For EDM tracks like Polaris by Deadmau5, they do fare a little bit better, but there is a lot of energy in the synth lead that is, unfortunately, a little bit too much. And I found myself having to turn down the volume, which further obfuscates the low end. So whilst this might be a somewhat V-shaped sound, unfortunately I think that the balance is way off. Although I did enjoy Hotel California by Eagles, and the 12-string has a decent shimmer or sparkle, the percussive hits have a really good energy, but the low end could have used a little bit more definition. Now, during the delayed guitar section towards the end of Talk Talk by a Perfect Circle, I found this to be quite bright and steely, and I think maybe even blurry is the word I would use. There's just simply a lack of definition. Treble is quite a bit grainy and lacking in detail. The treble drops off a little bit after the peak at 5 kHz, but still remains rather elevated, especially compared to the T4. This elevation is also quite extended into the upper treble and air frequencies, and as a result, along with the upper mid shoutiness, this is a really rather bright headphone, despite the elevated bass. Now, all of this might seem like a harsh judgment for a £10 or $14 IEM. I suppose for a $14 IEM, these aren't too bad, and on technicalities, they are about as good as one could expect for that price. But it's the tuning that seems to be way off to me. Now, whilst these could have had a fun V-shaped sound signature, the low end is simply unable to counterbalance this upper mid forwardness and treble energy. For my taste at least, I find them lacking in so many areas that I feel that I couldn't possibly use these even casually. For those that do like a rather forward sound signature and maybe even enjoy that 5 kHz energy, this is probably the budget fight earphone for you. However, for me, despite their insanely low price tag, I'm going to have to give the KZ ZSN Pro a miss. Right, that's going to be it then. If you like this video, then don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't already, then please consider subscribing. And if you like what I'm doing and you want to support the channel, then check the links down in the description. I'm on Patreon now, and join at any tier and get access to the Discord, or join at the $5 tier or above and get your name over here alongside these legends. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.